I sent every single paycheck for 2 full years without missing a month. My name is Noelle Grayson. I am 28 years old, and I live alone in a rented place far from my family home because the drive to work leaves almost no free time. My parents told me the woodwork shop had collapsed after bad materials ruined every contract. They said the debt had reached $180,000 and the house would be lost unless my sister and I each sent our entire $1,500 paychecks every month. I believed them. I took a second job, cut every extra expense, and transferred the full amount into my mother's account on the same date each month. I rarely went home. Only major holidays or family anniversaries pulled me back. The rest of the time, I stayed in my small rental and kept working. I told myself the sacrifice protected the only house that held our family history. I never questioned the story. I never asked for proof. I simply sent the money and kept going. Then, one ordinary afternoon, I stopped by the house on my way back from a short visit and heard something that destroyed every assumption I had carried for 2 years. The voices inside were not worried. They were relaxed, almost amused, and the words they used about the money and about me made the floor feel unsteady under my feet. I stood still and listened longer than I should have. What I learned in those minutes changed the meaning of every transfer I had ever made. If you have ever given more than you could afford because someone you loved said the situation was desperate, stay with me until the end. What happens when the story you trusted falls apart? Forces hard choices about boundaries and self-respect. What would you have done in my place? That afternoon, I stopped by the house after congratulating my close friend on the opening of her new shop. The taxi dropped me near the end of the driveway and I walked the rest of the way toward the front steps. I immediately noticed a car I had never seen before parked close to the house. The place rarely had visitors, so the unfamiliar vehicle stood out at once. I moved closer to the open living room window and heard voices that carried clearly into the yard. My mother, my father, my older sister Imogen, and a man I did not recognize were talking in relaxed tones that showed no sign of worry. I stopped a few feet from the window and listened without making any sound. They spoke about the monthly transfers as if the money arrived on schedule without any trouble or delay. Imogen mentioned that the workshop had been placed under her management early on and that her boyfriend handled the day-to-day decisions so that I would stay unaware of the real situation. The man added a few comments about how smoothly the arrangement had worked over the past months. My father noted that the payments from me continued without questions or requests for any kind of proof. My mother agreed and said the extra funds made everything easier on their end and required almost no extra effort. Imogen's voice rose with clear amusement as she continued the conversation. That stupid girl, how would she ever find out about any of this? Loud laughter followed from everyone in the room. The sound lasted several seconds before the talk continued in the same easy manner. They discussed upcoming plans that had nothing to do with debt or the risk of losing the house. The man spoke about recent orders and payments that had come in through the workshop. Imogen responded with details about how the books were kept separate from the story I had been told since the beginning of the 2 years. I remained still outside the window and took in every word without moving closer or stepping away. No one inside mentioned financial pressure or canceled contracts caused by faulty materials. The tone stayed light and satisfied throughout the entire exchange. Imogen referred again to the regular deposits I made into my mother's account and how convenient it was that I never asked for statements or confirmation of any kind. My father made a short comment about keeping the original story consistent whenever I called or happened to visit. The man laughed once more and said the setup had held longer than expected without any real complications arising. The conversation shifted to other practical matters connected to the workshop. Imogen explained how certain expenses were covered directly from the workshop income, while the money I sent each month remained available for separate uses. My mother added that the whole arrangement required little effort, as long as the transfers kept arriving on the usual date. The man offered a few suggestions about future steps that clearly assumed the current system would continue without interruption or discovery. None of them spoke in the worried tone I had heard during earlier phone calls when they described the danger of losing the family house. After several more minutes, the voices moved toward another part of the house and became harder to follow with clarity. I stepped back from the window and walked quietly back to the street where I called another taxi. I left the property without knocking or announcing that I had been there. The ride back to my rental passed in complete silence as the full conversation replayed in my mind with every detail still sharp. Every statement I had heard matched a clear pattern. The workshop had not collapsed in the way they described 2 years earlier. Imogen held control of the operations and allowed her boyfriend to manage the daily work while the money I sent continued to arrive each month without any questions from me. I reached my place and sat in the parked taxi for a short time before getting out and going inside. The information I now carried changed the meaning of the past 2 years in a direct way that could not be ignored. I had no intention of confronting anyone that same day. Instead, I needed time to examine bank records and any old messages that might confirm the timeline they had discussed so openly among themselves. The afternoon visit that began as a simple stop on the way home had delivered facts I could not set aside. The laughter after Imogen's remark about my ignorance remained especially clear and returned each time I thought about the scene outside the window. I paid the driver, stepped inside my rental, and already decided that the next steps would require careful checking of every available record before any further contact with the family. 2 days after returning to the rented place, I began checking everything on my own. I opened the banking app and pulled up every transfer I had made into my mother's account over the past 24 months. Each record showed the same amount leaving on the same date without variation. I compared those entries with the old text messages in which my parents had repeated the story about the workshop collapse and the growing debt that threatened the house. The messages contained no attachments, no scanned documents, and no supplier notices that supported the claims of canceled contracts or unpaid materials. I searched for any public information linked to the wood workshop and found a few recent supplier notes along with a short local listing that showed orders had continued during the same period when I was told the business had completely stopped. The details lined up with what I had overheard about Imogen placing her boyfriend in charge of the daily operations so that I would remain unaware. Nothing in those records matched the version of total failure that had been given to me at the start of the 2 years. I sent a short message to my close friend, only to confirm the exact time I had been near the house that afternoon and the reason for the visit. She replied with the window of time and asked nothing further. I did not explain what I had heard, and she did not press for any details. The exchange stayed limited to the schedule and ended quickly. Later that evening, I went through the numbers once more and placed the workshop activity beside the monthly transfers I had sent. The two sources of money appeared to have been treated as separate streams that both remained available for use. The original account of $180,000 in debt and the urgent risk of losing the house did not align with the activity now visible in the records. The more carefully I examined the statements and the old messages, the wider the gap became between the story I had accepted and the facts in front of me. I sat at the small table in the rental and reached the decision that same night. The next scheduled transfer would not leave my account. I did not write any message to my parents or to Imogen. I simply removed the automatic reminder from the calendar and recorded the date in a separate note. The choice required no discussion with anyone else. After that, I opened a new spreadsheet and began adjusting my own monthly figures. I recalculated the rent, the hours from the second job, and the basic living costs without the regular $1,500 payment going out. The revised numbers showed that my finances could remain stable once the transfer stopped. I set aside a modest buffer for the following 2 months in case any unexpected contact created temporary pressure on the accounts. The entire process stayed practical and focused on clear amounts rather than on emotion. Before closing the files, I looked again at the early messages that had first described the emergency. The language in those exchanges had been consistent and urgent at the time. Now those same words sat next to records that told a different account of the workshop's continued activity and the steady arrival of my transfers. I saved complete copies of the statements, the messages, and the public notes in a separate folder and shut the laptop. The night ended with the decision already fixed and the next steps limited to protecting my own accounts from any further automatic outflow. On the exact due date for the monthly transfer, my phone lit up again with an incoming call from home. I answered after the second ring and heard my mother's voice move straight into the familiar reminder without any greeting or small talk. She told me to remember to send the full amount this month because the house situation was urgent and the next payment deadline on the property could not be missed under any circumstances. In the background, my father's voice came through the speaker clearly as he added that they did not want to lose the place that held so many family memories, and that the risk of foreclosure remained real if the money failed to arrive on the usual date. I listened to the complete call without raising any objection, without asking for updated figures on the debt, and without mentioning a single detail of the information I had already gathered. When the moment came for a reply, I said only that I would review my finances for the month, and then ended the conversation in a calm and brief manner. After the line went silent, I placed the phone on the table and left the banking app completely closed. The automatic reminder I had removed 2 days earlier stayed gone from every calendar and notification list. No transfer left my account that afternoon or evening. The decision reached during the earlier careful review of the statements and messages remained firmly in place without any second thought or adjustment. I continued with the rest of the day's schedule, completed the hours at the second job, prepared a simple meal at the rental, and kept the phone face down so that no new alert would interrupt the quiet I had chosen. Later that same night, a text message arrived from Imogen. The message asked in general terms how things were going on my end and whether the usual monthly arrangement would continue as it had for the past 2 years. I read the words once, noted the exact timestamp, and then set the phone aside again without typing any response. No reply went out that night or the following morning. The unanswered message joined the earlier phone call as the first clear and deliberate break in the pattern that had held without interruption for 24 consecutive months. The next morning, I opened the account only long enough to confirm that the available balance remained unchanged by any outgoing payment to my mother's account. The figures matched the revised personal budget I had built after examining every relevant record. Rent for the small place, the steady hours from the second job, and the basic monthly living costs now stood without the regular $1,500 deduction that had left every month on the same date. The modest buffer I had calculated and set aside for the next 2 months stayed untouched and reserved only for expenses under my direct control. I made no attempt to contact anyone in the family and received no further calls or messages during the full working hours that followed. By the end of the second day, the absence of the transfer had created a stretch of silence that had never existed during the previous 2 years. No additional messages arrived to demand an explanation or to repeat the earlier urgency about the house and the memories connected to it. No one called back to ask why the money had not appeared in the usual account. The quiet on their side continued without interruption, while I kept strictly to the schedule of both jobs and the adjusted numbers on my side. I recorded the exact date of the missed transfer in the same private file that already held the complete copies of the bank statements, the old text messages, and the public notes about the workshop. The first month without the payment began and continued in that plain and unbroken quiet, with every practical step limited to protecting the accounts that carried only my name and to maintaining the boundary I had set without announcement or discussion. That weekend, I decided to drive home to clear everything up. I walked into the living room where my parents and Imogen were already sitting. I looked at them and said I heard the entire conversation that day. I told them I had stood outside the house and listened to every part of what they discussed about the money I still sent each month without suspicion, and about the arrangement that placed Imogen's boyfriend in the official management role so I would stay unaware. I looked at Imogen and said he is not a partner at all. I stated that the man they called a major partner held the real control over every decision she made at the workshop. Imogen shook her head and denied it at once. She said her boyfriend only helped with daily operations and that no one controlled her. My mother cut in and said I must have misunderstood the private talk. My father added that the family had worked hard to keep the house and that my support over the past 2 years had made that possible. I answered that the money I transferred each month had not gone toward the debts they described. I looked at both of them and said, "The workshop did not go bankrupt like Mom and Dad said." I pointed out that the funds from the business and from my transfers had been used for other purposes entirely. Imogen repeated that her boyfriend held no hidden authority and that I was inventing a story. My parents kept returning to the idea that I had simply gotten the wrong impression and that the house still needed protection. I refused those explanations. The exchange grew tighter as neither side moved from its position. I told them the conversation I overheard left no room for doubt and that further excuses would change nothing. I then said that all financial support from me ended at that moment and that I would not listen to any more justifications. Imogen tried once more to deny the control her boyfriend held. My parents urged me to think about the years of family support I had received before I started working. I rejected every point with the facts I had already checked about the money flow and the management arrangement. When they continued to push the same defenses, I stood up and repeated that the transfers stopped for good. I left the room without answering any further comments and walked straight out of the house. I added that I had heard the laughter that followed when Imogen called me the foolish one who would never find out. I made it clear again that the man standing with them that afternoon was never a legitimate partner, and that the workshop had continued operating the entire time, while they claimed it faced total failure. My mother said once more that I had only caught pieces of a private talk and drawn the wrong conclusion. My father insisted the risk to the house remained real, and that my monthly transfers had been the only thing standing between the family and the loss of the property. Imogen denied again that her boyfriend directed any decisions and claimed he simply handled paperwork under her guidance. I answered that the bank records and the public information about the workshop showed a different picture from the one they had presented for 2 years. I stated that the money left my account on the same date each month, yet never appeared to reduce the debts they described as urgent. I told them the arrangement that placed her boyfriend in the official role existed to keep me from asking questions. Imogen raised her voice and said I had no right to accuse her of hiding the truth. My parents both spoke about the sacrifices the family had made and about the years before I left for work when they supported me without question. I replied that support given in the past did not justify the lies about the workshop or the continued requests for money. I repeated that the workshop had never collapsed the way they claimed and that the funds had served other purposes. The discussion continued without any side yielding. I said I would not accept further explanations or appeals to family feeling. I declared that every form of financial help from me stopped at that moment, and that no future request would receive a response. Imogen made one last attempt to insist her boyfriend held only a limited role. My father asked me to reconsider for the sake of the house. My mother asked whether I truly intended to cut off the only steady support the family still relied on. I answered that the decision was final, and that the facts I had confirmed left no other choice. I stood up from the chair and walked to the door while they continued speaking. I did not turn back or reply to the final comments that followed me out of the living room. Right after I finished speaking, Imogen and my parents all spoke up at once. Imogen looked at me and said, "He only helps me? He is not controlling anything." She insisted her boyfriend simply supported the management work and held no full control over her decisions at the workshop. My mother and my father shifted the talk toward family feeling. My father said, "You cannot abandon the family like this. They both reminded me of the years before I started working when they had supported me without question. I listened to each point and then rejected them one by one with the information I had already verified. I stated that the bank records showed the money I sent each month never reduced the debts they described. I pointed out that the public details about the workshop confirmed it had never stopped operating the way they claimed. I told them the arrangement that placed her boyfriend in the official role existed to keep the real control away from open view. Imogen repeated that he only assisted with paperwork and supplier contacts under her direction. My parents returned again to the idea of family duty and the support they had given me in earlier years. I answered that past support did not erase the false statements about the workshop or the continued requests for money after the true situation became clear. I made the decision to cut off the relationship completely and said it only once in clear terms. I told them I required the Grayson family to stop all contact with me for any financial reason or any emotional reason from that moment forward. I stated that no further calls, messages, or visits would receive a response. Imogen tried once more to explain that her boyfriend held only a limited supporting role. My father pressed the point about not abandoning the family. My mother added that the house and the years of shared history still mattered. I rejected every remaining argument with the same verified facts about the money flow and the management rights at the workshop. When they continued speaking, I stood up from the chair. I walked out of the living room and then out of the house, without turning to look back at any of them. The door closed behind me and I went to the car. I started the engine and drove away from the property with the decision already stated and the boundary already set. No further words left my mouth after the final request for no more contact. The drive back to the rental took place in silence. I kept my attention on the road and on the practical steps that would follow from the complete break. The accounts under my name remained the only ones I would manage from that day. The monthly transfers that had left on the same date for 2 years would not resume. Any attempt by the Grayson family to reach me would meet the same closed response. I arrived at the rental and went inside without checking the phone for new messages. The evening passed with the same steady schedule of the second job and the adjusted personal budget. The next morning, I confirmed that no outgoing payment had left the account and that the private file of records remained complete. The cut I had declared the day before stayed in place without adjustment. The request for no further contact of any kind remained the last statement I had made to them. Less than a month after the confrontation, the news about the workshop reached me. The wood workshop collapsed when Imogen's boyfriend took the remaining funds and disappeared. Later reports identified him as only a low-level employee who had never held any real partnership role. Imogen faced direct responsibility for the management decisions and entered a legal process that led to a prison sentence. The pressure from the collapse and the legal case proved too heavy for my father. His health declined until he was admitted to the hospital after a heart attack. My mother tried several times to contact me. In one message, she wrote that Imogen was under serious investigation. In another call, she said, "Dad is in the hospital now, can you come back?" I read the messages and listened to the voicemails without sending any reply. I kept the boundary I had already set and did not join any further discussion about support or return. Every consequence now rested entirely with the Grayson family. No intervention came from my side. I continued the steady schedule of both jobs and the adjusted personal budget that no longer included any monthly transfer. The private file of bank statements and workshop records stayed complete and closed. When new messages arrived from my mother, I left them unread after the first glance at the sender name. When the phone rang with the familiar number, I let it go to voicemail and deleted the recording later without listening a second time. The information about the boyfriend's true position as a low-level worker matched the details I had already verified months earlier. The legal process against Imogen moved forward without any statement or appearance from me. The hospital admission for my father remained a fact I noted once and then set aside. I made no call to the hospital and sent no message of concern. The decision to cut all contact stayed in place without exception. Friends who heard fragments of the family news asked once or twice whether I planned to respond. I answered only that the matter was closed and that no further comment would follow. The rental stayed quiet in the evenings. The second job continued on the same hours. The account balance grew slowly without the regular $1,500 deduction that had left every month for 2 years. I recorded the date of each ignored message in the same private file that held the earlier records. No new transfer left the account. No new conversation began. The workshop failure, the prison sentence, and the hospital stay all remained on the other side of the boundary I had drawn. I kept my attention on the work in front of me and on the practical numbers under my own name. The requests for a change of decision arrived and then stopped when they received no answer. The silence on my side continued without break. The consequences stayed where they belonged, fully with the Grayson family and fully outside any further action from me. 3 months after the day I cut off all contact, each life had moved in its own direction. I settled back into a steady routine with both jobs and a personal budget that no longer carried any regular payment sent home. The account under my name grew without the monthly deduction that had left on the same date for 2 years. Imogen began serving a prison sentence for her direct role in the management of the workshop and for allowing another person to control its operations. My father remained under long-term medical care after the heart attack, and the family faced real financial difficulty once the support ended. My mother and other relatives made several attempts to reach me with requests to reverse the decision. I left every message unanswered and every call ignored. The boundary I had set stayed firm without exception. No discussion about money or return took place. The practical steps of daily work and the adjusted numbers under my control continued without change. The private file of statements and records remained closed. Friends who learned of the family situation asked once whether I planned to respond. I answered only that the matter was finished and that no further comment would follow. The rental stayed quiet in the evenings. The second job kept the same hours. The absence of the $1,500 transfer each month left a clear difference in the monthly balance. I recorded the dates of the ignored messages in the same file that already held the earlier documents. No new transfer left the account. No new conversation began. The prison sentence, the long medical treatment, and the financial strain all remained on the other side of the line I had drawn. From this experience, it became clear that setting a firm boundary is necessary when trust has been used for too long. No one carries an endless duty to sacrifice for others once that sacrifice has been met with betrayal. Another lesson stood out as well. Important information about money and large assets needs verification instead of full acceptance of what relatives claim. The facts I checked for myself showed a different picture from the one presented for 2 years. The decision to stop the support and the contact stayed in place because those facts left no other workable choice. I continued the work schedule and the personal budget without looking back at the requests that arrived and then stopped. The consequences stayed where they belonged. Thank you to everyone who stayed with the story until the final part. If you have a view on the boundary I set or on the need to verify family claims about money, leave it in the comments below.